So yeah, I can see people are still registering, but let's start promptly as we mean to go on. And so thank you all for attending today's webinar, the topic of which is how to successfully integrate a financial planning and an investment management business. Ken and I have discussed this a couple of times over coffee. It's kind of great to be able to spend some face-to-face time with people rather than on Zoom. But hey, we're on Zoom today, and I think probably one of the biggest challenges today will be to limit it to the time frame we've got, which is about 50 minutes, because there are so many different facets of this topic to discuss. So in order to try and kind of limit it and give some order, we've agreed kind of a relatively high-level agenda just to tick through some areas that we think are of most interest. So broadly speaking, on the agenda, we're going to be looking at the distribution model for a combined financial planning and investment management business. We're going to look at the economics of that model, kind of how it works, the kind of the good and the bad. That will lead us on to the always thorny topic of incentives and rewards, because again, it's the different business models with different kind of structures coming together. And again, then on to organizational structure. Again, it's very different when you look at an investment manager versus a financial planner, and it's important to understand that organizational structure. We'll then have some conversations around technology, and then pose some thoughts forward on what we think that future operating model or future business might look like. So before we kind of kick off into that, I'd like to introduce Ken Taylor from Alpha FMC. And Ken, would you take kind of 30 seconds to introduce yourself and kind of let everybody know kind of who you are and kind of where your area of expertise and experience?
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and morning, everybody. Great to have the opportunity to chat through this topic. It's very, very topical. We have a lot of clients talking to us around the challenges and opportunities in this area. So my name's Ken Taylor. I head up the work that we do in wealth management at Alpha. We're a specialist wealth and asset management consultancy firm headquartered here in the UK in Gresham Street in London, but got a global footprint which stretches across North America, widespread into Europe and into Asia. And we see the various models across the world that firms use in the wealth management area. We'll touch on some of the lessons and examples as we go through today. But looking forward to the discussion today, and hope this is useful to you as you start to think about your own businesses.
Fantastic, thanks, Ken. And I should say, we'll try our best. If you've got questions, fire them in. I'll do my best to kind of, if they don't get answered straight away, that's due to my webinar failure rather than anything else. But we'll loop them up at the end if we do get some questions that we haven't answered or been able to answer within the flow. And clearly, if we don't get to answer any of those, again, we'll kind of respond back at the end of it and follow up on any questions that didn't get caught in this session. So kind of first question, let's kick off, Ken. Why are firms keen to combine financial planning and investment management? What's the kind of the general mood and opinion on that?
I think it's definitely part of the way that firms now see new clients approaching them. You know, our clients say to us that the conversations with new clients increasingly start with a planning conversation. So for example, very simple examples of, how do I most efficiently turn this retirement pot into an income that's going to last for the rest of my life? How do I protect the wealth that I've built up over my lifetime for my children's benefit? So firms, know that they want to manage the assets for these clients, but they've got to solve the problem of the planning need to unlock the opportunity to manage the assets. I mean, many firms have traditionally worked with third-party financial planners and built a business around managing the investments for those firms' clients. But now, increasingly, it seems that clients are interested in that one-stop shop, and I think firms are responding to clients' need. We know that none of us like being passed from pillar to post when we're trying to deal with our service providers and financial institutions, and I think firms are just responding to that need.
Brilliant. And then is that so? Your typical kind of planner or investment manager today has that kind of probably mix of maybe 60% baby boomers, 40% professionals. That's broadly the mix, and obviously firms vary a little bit. But is that the mix that's then coming to ask this question, or is a kind of combined offering enticing the kind of the next gen or future gens as well?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think I think firms see this right across the range. I don't think it's just being driven by one particular generation. I think it's definitely true that younger generations are likely to think about the way that they plan their finances very differently, and are more attuned to researching themselves and shopping around. However, whether it's inheritance issues, a sale of a business, estate planning, all of those situations have got a planning aspects. The younger generations are more likely to be interested in accumulation goals, and the olders in income and gifting. But there's clear evidence that service expectations right across the range are becoming more instant and more accessible. And as tax gets more complex, inevitably, and cross-border working and domiciles increase, you can see that the complexity of people's situations just increases, and this is where the ability of planners to kind of help individuals through some of that complexity really comes into its own.
Excellent. It kind of leads us neatly into kind of the first bit that we talked about on the agenda, which is distribution. I think we all know that's not an easy thing to do, and you and I have spoken about. We've seen a few that's kind of very successful business to businesses decide that they're going to be kind of planning led, and suddenly realize that a direct to consumer kind of proposition is an entirely different beast. You maybe kind of cut off your existing kind of inflows of new business, and you've got to kind of charge forward into kind of what is a whole new market. And I think certainly the bar for D2C distribution has been set pretty high by the likes of a Hargreaves or a St James's Place. So kind of what are your observations on that kind of that distribution model, and kind of it being successful or not, and kind of the behaviors around that?
Yeah, and I think here in you start to get into some of the implications of traditional firms who've dealt with third-party advisors starting to deal with end clients through that prospecting, planning, and onboarding processes. It's very clear that particularly in this remote working environment, everybody shops around, don't they? They can check out your digital footprint as a firm very, very easily. What does that digital footprint say about the firm? Does it look and feel like a traditional stockbroker, or does it feel like a firm that's going to be able to help you plan your future needs and is there for you in a client service environment? Because I think those are starting to become some of the factors that will be important. It's not just now about having the people with the right qualifications. It's about how do you deal and service those clients, and how can they contact you, and how are you going to report to them, and all of those aspects are now going to be full part of your operating model, and you're going to have the right people and the right support for clients as they start to go through those journeys.
It's interesting, isn't it? Us as British people, we're kind of normally very polite, and I suspect some of the kind of relationships have been kind of formed and retained because people are reluctant to give bad news face to face. But certainly when you look at digitization, maybe in another industry, you've seen the kind of the brand loyalty disappear quite quickly because somebody can give a 1-star review and go elsewhere. But equally, people can hurry to a new brand to kind of give it new business. Do you think that there's that ability to, or there will be any sort of kind of similar behavior around kind of wealth management, that people will kind of drop one provider and move to a next quicker, or do you think there'll kind of be a bit of loyalty?
Yeah, I think it's early days in terms of how that kind of consumer behaviour will impact firms. I mean, traditionally, and one of the reasons why wealth management has been so attractive for corporate investors is that the assets are deemed to be very sticky. Once customers are making long-term plans, they kind of stick with it, don't they? It's quite difficult to move stuff around, as we all know. So there's not much evidence at the moment that customers will become more flighty. But you can see that all the capability and ability for people to move around is there. And what we do see is that more firms competing on price, experience, and the ability to pull assets together, consolidate, see all your assets in the same place, start to play to an environment where people will move their assets around the market far more often. And there's a challenge for firms. And I think one of the things that might be driving bringing planning and investment management together is, if you've got it all in one shop, there's no reason for anybody to move. So I think there's an asset retention play here for firms to try and make sure that they can put their arms around customers and give them everything that they need.
And on that's a kind of interesting point. Are you seeing that as a kind of, again, irrespective of kind of generation? So I think there was always that story kind of pre-COVID of, oh, my client's never going to want to be on Zoom or this, that, and the other. My client's not going to want a portal. But clearly, we've all found that over the last 18 months, you've needed them, and people have digitized quite quickly. So in that kind of overall experience of kind of one-stop shop and kind of price and consolidation, is that across the board with everybody, and in that kind of exploring, does a firm feel right for me? Are those explorations happening with the kind of the baby boomer generation all the way down?
Yeah, I think people's circumstances have definitely changed through the pandemic. I was with a wealth manager just the tail end of last week, and I was asking them whether the client footfall into their nice client offices had bounced back, and they were saying, yes, as people are starting to return to work, and that they're seeing far more clients come back into the office and happy to do so. But equally, there is a whole section of their clients who've now got used to dealing with remotely, quite like it, and from their reports, happy to stick to the model. I think we did some research on client portal use earlier this year, and we see a very definite trend amongst the younger generations, particularly that millennial generation of, if I don't like the digital experience that my wealth manager, my financial planner is giving me, I'm up for considering going somewhere else, and I'm going to consider that quite important in terms of the range of factors I'm going to consider. So I think firms need to take this seriously. There are definitely generations that will think nothing of switching because they don't like the digital experience that they're getting from their firm.
So okay, that's great. So basically, it's not a field of dreams kind of model where if you build it, they will come. And it has to be kind of distribution, kind of well thought out, and also distribution with a mind on how do you retain people. So I suspect what we're probably saying is that there's going to have to be some kind of relatively big investment in not just the technology, but with the kind of digital marketing to get people in and to retain them. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the range of expectations that customers now have of their wealth managers in terms of what should they be able to do on their mobile phone, on their portal, is ever increasing. It's not just enough to give a simple valuation anymore. People want to drill down, understand how these investments are meeting their investment goals. So a whole range of capabilities that customers will increasingly be looking for.
And so that, I mean, yeah, you can see that it's not going to be it's going to be almost, you can say it's expensive. You're going to have to be continually investing, which again is a kind of is a positive thing, and again what all businesses should do. But actually that then impacts the economics of the whole approach. And I think we know from kind of what you said at the start, combining the two gives you an opportunity to kind of meet clients earlier and get kind of deeper wallet penetration, and also to retain clients longer as you get into kind of planning for later life and kind of estate planning and all of those things. But it's not as simple as just kind of slamming planning and investment management together and taking double the fees, is it? So what are you seeing? Any kind of different business models, Kerm? Are you kind of hearing about any kind of client reaction to pricing? What are you seeing?
Yeah, this is one of the, as we started to get into, so in reality, what might it look like, and how do we start to explain to customers the range of services that as a firm we offer? It gets a bit more complicated, because planning fees are often upfront, and they're a more difficult conversation with the client, frankly. I'm going to give you some advice, and you're going to have to pay for it. Whereas the kind of ongoing investment management fees can often feel less painful and less immediate to a customer. Also, sort of slightly harder to visualize in terms of how much they're going to be. Now, obviously, regulation has driven quite a lot of the way that firms have to behave and the way that they have to disclose fees. So there's not many ways that firms can get creative about their fee structures and how they disclose those to clients, because it is so heavily driven by regulation. But that level of disclosure that has driven greater transparency and greater fee sensitivity from clients, and we definitely see and we hear our clients say that trying to make sure that they balance out the need to be completely transparent with customers and trying to make it simple so that they can understand it is quite a challenge, and it's quite a dilemma. I think as customers, we all like clear menus of services that we can go and pick from, and make sure that we're comfortable that we're getting value for money for what we're paying for. And I think that holds true across this range. But yes, they're being very clear with customers which part of the service they're engaging with and what they're going to pay for, and the value that they get from each part of that service is the important piece of making sure that the fee structures that you put around the services are then understood and acceptable to clients.
And I've had a few kind of conversations before where people have been trying different business models, certainly different kind of pricing models. They're kind of the classic kind of almost like a gym membership. You pay kind of X pounds a month for advice, and you can kind of dip in and dip out. Obviously kind of banking on the fact that a bit like a gym, you might get a bit of a flurry, but then broadly you probably got 10% of people using it and 90% of people paying for it. Do you see any models like that occurring anywhere where it's worked or hasn't worked?
Yeah, there's definitely room in the market for different models, and I think we've seen there are different groups of customers that react in different ways. So I think that sort of almost subscription style pricing for I want the service, I'm going to use it regularly, and I want to dip in and out of it as my needs determine. Then, you know, often quite appeals where you're trusting a firm with pretty much everything that you're doing, and you know you're going to be in regular contact. If I've just got a one-off need, I'm trying to unlock a complex situation, I need some deep expertise and help. You know, pension transfers is kind of the obvious one that always springs to mind, but there's many of them, particularly around estate planning and setting up trusts, and I need some deep expert. But it's a one-off transaction that I'm going to do with that firm and with that planner, and I think for those situations, and you know, I think firms have got to be prepared to have flexibility in terms of their fee models and not try and force customers into a one-size-fits-all model that might not be appropriate for different situations. Rather depends on the range of services, the range of customers' needs that they're trying to address. But often, I think we find that firms need to be to be very sensitive to the client situation and what they're actually asking for, rather than trying to say, well, you know, here's our service model. We're going to try and force you into that model because that's kind of the way that we operate.
I guess that does create a challenge for the business, because I think sometimes people build a service model because they're trying to think of, how do I make each of my front office professionals profitable? So if you've got one who's got 30 clients on a kind of a license basis, paying an ad hoc but not coming back to them, then that front office professional isn't making revenue. So how do you think people can manage kind of almost manage that blend, where, you know, you've got a traditional investment management model, I've got an AUM, I've got my ad valorem fee, I know that's going to cover all the costs that I incur, versus maybe a more volatile model of some advice, kind of a lower ongoing service, etc. Is that a challenge?
Yeah, and I think this sort of now drives the heart of, you know, how do firms incorporate both models. So there's obviously the customer aspect of it, but then it's internally, how do we organize around this, and which professionals do we need to have in place to service the clients? Let's just talk about the remuneration and the cost, and then we can move on to the organizational models. You're right, you know, the planners are there to do that transactional planning service, and we want them to be paid fees for that. The investment managers, you know, we need to be able to build up assets, to accumulate assets over a long period of time, look after them, grow them, protect them, do all those good pieces that the investment managers do. But it's a very different style. It's a very different, potentially it's a very different reward structure that we need to put in place for each of those different types of disciplines. What do we do? Do we have two separate teams with different reward structures? How's that going to impact on the way that they deal with clients? Do they share rewards, but they've got different behavioral drivers? Or actually, do we kind of pool everything and say, actually, it doesn't matter from the business's point of view who does what in this transaction chain, as long as we're all growing the business and we're growing the profits? But yes, ultimately, for an investment manager who's built a large portfolio of clients, can very, if you will, comfortably sit on that client bank and continue to manage those assets very professionally, whereas the planner is probably out there looking for a continual stream of new clients to be able to advise. How do you square that circle in terms of the rewards and how the firms operate?
And I guess that must almost lead to a bit of tension within, because again, if you think you can kind of sit on a great client base that you've built up over X amount of years, and then just continue to maintain that relationship and the value of assets, and get a fantastic reward, versus somebody else who's having to continually run and find things, there's a tension there, isn't there? I think. So do you think do you envision it coming back more to like the being a team and a kind of a team revenue structure or a corporate structure, or the need to be a real kind of a bit of a break in the existing model of remuneration?
I don't think there's any one right answer here, and I think a lot depends on the history of the firm and how they've got to where they are. I think I think ultimately culture is really inside the firm is really important. And we've seen shared reward structures. We've seen different schemes with referral and incentive rewards between the teams, and we've seen firms where they've tried to take the incentive rewards dilemma away from the individuals and make it on a team basis. I think all of those potentially can work. Ultimately, it's about the design. As ever with any kind of reward and incentive structure, you've got to watch for that it doesn't create the wrong behaviours, and often there are some regulatory requirements that are important as well to take into consideration, and we're going to get more of that coming down the line. We know the regulator has already signposted they're very interested in this area. So I think the detail of the design is important. Fixing the culture of the business is the important piece, and then having the right organisational structure and reward incentives to support that culture.
And so that's a kind of really kind of good point, and does lead us into the organisational piece, because clearly if a firm was, let's say, kind of planning to start with and then built out an investment proposition, they will probably be starting with a different organizational structure to somebody who is maybe your kind of traditional stockbroker to start with, and then decided to add on planning capabilities around there. Does that change the culture? And again, as we know, kind of it's the people at top who dictate what the pricing, or sorry, what the remuneration structure is. So do you see almost two divergent models slowly converging, or?
I think the lessons are the same. I think you're right. History definitely plays a part in terms of how firms start to think about bringing this together, but also corporate objectives. If you're determined to build out the planning arm, then there's obviously some investment going into the business. I think the lessons are, avoid silos and fiefdoms. It's been very easy to consider the two parts of the organisation are separate. They deal with different systems and technologies and processes, and therefore we'll keep them separate. And then ultimately they just end up not collaborating together, and that's no good for the firm. So organisational structure can't solve the problems, but it can support the changes that are needed to bring the two parts of the organisation closer together. Obviously, whilst they're dealing with different ultimate processes, actually a lot of the core processes that both teams are doing are the same. The client management disciplines, onboarding, annual reviews, so a whole series of processes that broadly each team are doing. Obviously, processes and technology become quite important in terms of how firms think about bringing these two together. Matt, from your point of view, this is core for your firm. What are you seeing in terms of firms thinking about the common processes across these areas?
Well, I think in terms of the common process, you're absolutely correct. Is people want to have how do you make a client as easily as possible, and it almost comes back to getting somebody to be a client of the firm rather than the client of the advisor or the client of the investment manager. And kind of whilst that's a challenge, because you look at lots of firms and you might have kind of Matt Lonsdale Financial Planning, Matt Lonsdale Investment Management, Matt Lonsdale Wealth, and who do you onboard to? There's clearly a challenge, but actually the desire, I think, is to find as fewer moving parts as possible and to onboard the clients to one place, and then have that ability to kind of broaden out the service from once that initial relationship is formed. So when we speak to firms, that's often a common goal in terms of that early part of the process. And then we see kind of two other areas, certainly from a kind of technology perspective, where they're trying to find the most impact, most bang for the buck. And I think the one certainly relates around digitization, and it's about how do you make each front office professional more efficient. We all know there's kind of certain, it used to be somewhere between kind of, let's say, 75 and 100 clients that people thought they could manage successfully. And I think now people are starting to try and push that up more and more and more, obviously without kind of denigrating the service that you get for your clients. So we find lots of people are looking at how do we do that? And that might be through a combined model. We've got a planner and we've got an investment manager. How do we make sure the client can access them both and access the reviews and not do 2 reviews and all of those other things? Equally, how do we maybe embrace what we've realized the clients will do over the last 2 years by allowing them to kind of self-serve more, allowing them to kind of gather more information themselves, or look on a portal, and again using that kind of freed up time to be able to create a kind of again maximize that front office professional. And I think the other side then, it got to be kind of, this is interesting, and you and I kind of discussed, is you do all that fantastic stuff in the front, and then it goes kind of thundering down to the back office. And the back office of a planner is a very different beast to the back office of an investment manager. And so going to a planner, you might have 5 or 6 platforms that you need to integrate with. But if you were traditionally an investment manager, you might have 1 custodian. And lots of our conversations then are around either can we integrate with everything, or kind of what might we do, or what might we recommend in order to help them consolidate the moving parts in the back into a more simple model. Do you see people kind of, again, looking at that the back office and saying, oh, how do I reduce the number of providers I've got there?
Yeah, I definitely, and you know, some of the more painful processes that firms have to undertake, as you say, facing out to multiple platforms to execute their planning decisions for clients, and then bringing it back together for reporting. And I guess this is one area that I was going to ask about your experience, Matt, is that okay, once we've executed the trades, we've got them into the market, we bought the products that we need. How do we put it all back together again for the annual review with the client, for the regular contact, for the valuations that clients might want to see on the website, or on increasingly on their mobile app? Because I guess from a client's point of view, they still just see you as one firm, and they probably wouldn't understand why there's two different reports that come through to them.
Yeah, it is. You're going to go back to your point there. People have wanted to have that one-stop shop, and we spend quite a lot of time on those integrations to get as kind of many people integrated as possible. I think it's an interesting challenge, because I think it's one of those ones that for certainly for some time, certainly the smaller firms didn't really have the kind of the capital to invest in kind of deep integrations that really created impact and efficiency. And actually they would use people to scrub around and phone around and consolidate things and create a report from multiple sources, which they did to a high standard of production, but to a low standard of efficiency. Mm-hmm. And so more and more we're starting to get people to talk to us about, well, how many of the existing kind of moving parts that I've got today do you integrate with? And then starting to actually be challenged by, is that somebody that I should continue to work with in the future if actually they're slowing me down? I had a conversation with a firm a couple of weeks ago who'd got a back office provider, and they were coming up for review and was saying, well, actually, we want to know from you as to who you would align with, so we can then challenge this back office provider and say, well, look, we know we've now got 6 other people that we can refer to, and it kind of gave them a little bit of power in that negotiation. Because if they were the only game in town with good integration, actually, that they have a really strong mark to play. But if there are other people who are investing in that integration, it's quite powerful. And I think that kind of almost leads into a conversation about kind of when you're building that target operating model. You might see a fantastic widget on the side, but it's completely unattached to anything else. And that will kind of raise a challenge sometimes for these small fintech firms. If they're not part of an ecosystem, would somebody adopt them? Because why would you? That fantastic kind of user experience is slowing you down as an overall entity. How do you see that kind of playing in? Do you think kind of people are going to be more one ecosystem, or still trying to get a best of breed and bring it all together themselves?
Yeah, and obviously there's some great capability out there, and we've seen the digitization of quite a lot of the sort of individual processes, data feeds from the market, lots of great services. But as a firm, if you kind of start to try and absorb all of those, do you end up with a spaghetti mess on your side of the equation, trying to work out how to piece it all together? So there's definitely some middle ground here, which says, can I build a core which carries my core investment records, my core client records, my core portfolio records, and make sure that that's strong and sturdy? And then what can I feed from that? What can I feed into that, which kind of then enriches the service? Where are my real differentiators as a firm in front of my clients? Because that's the areas I probably want to invest in, whereas some of the nice to haves, can I actually compromise and just put up with what I've got out of my core platforms because it's good enough and it's not really going to win me business or make me extremely efficient? So yep, there's a danger that we get very excited by every new widget that comes on the market and try and plug it in, but ultimately we've got to be make sure that our core platforms are going to continue to perform, and that from a client's point of view, we're really adding value if we're going to adopt new processes, new technologies.
So there's a real balancing act then between that kind of the efficiency in one core and that kind of the embellishment for that real digital kind of fizz and excitement to get that right. And I guess that's going to be the continual challenge as people look to evolve their business model, aren't they? It's going to be how much efficiency can I drive to make my business successful versus what do I need in order to make my business attractive?
Yeah, agreed. And that's probably brings us around to the kind of last point we were going to finish up on, Matt, which was, okay, so that all sounds great. I want to get planning and investment management onto common platform, common processes where they join up, and how do we make all of that work? But what do firms need to do to start to plan the transition from where they are today into what might be a different business model and different operating platforms?
Yeah, I think there's some really kind of simple things to think about that I think that people need to think about in order to get this right. I think the thing that always makes it go wrong is to not be ambitious enough, because I think if you're on a current model and you're thinking about the model that you might be on next year, then you're not going far enough into the future. You're not being ambitious enough, because if you're moving from model A to model B, it's maybe going to take you 18 months to convert. It means you're 6 months behind before you even started. So you have to think this really big kind of long-term kind of ambitious strategy as to what do we need our business to be, big, bold, and kind of unencumbered by anything else that we might be sitting on today. Because if you kind of don't do that, you kind of don't get that blue sky thinking. So I think that's really important. I think kind of short-termism is a real challenge as well, because people worry that they're going to be on a kind of tied into a multi-year change program and see that as a bad thing, whereas actually a multi-year change program, if it's creating kind of iterative benefits, is actually a positive thing, again, as long as there's a plan. And so there's a kind of, I stole an analogy from a much cleverer guy than me, who's a futurist, and he talks about kind of think big, start small, scale fast. And I think that's a kind of a fantastic mantra to have if you're going to change operating model for a future state. So that kind of think big is, well, where should we be in kind of 5 years, and then from 5 years through to 10, rather than where are we now? The start small then is, well, if we are where we are today and we want to be at the position in 5 years time, what can we do now that's going to create an impact and start us on that journey? And then the kind of the scaling fast clearly is just committing and getting on that kind of multi-year cycle. And I think that's really the kind of the powerful mantra for how do you get these things moving.
Yeah, and I think, you know, many clients that we talk to, have done the think big, but then can't work out the next two steps, and it all becomes a bit too overwhelming, and not knowing where to start is definitely one of the key things that we see with clients.
Do you think the kind of the reticence to start, and where does that, is that sometimes from the front in or the back? Because we've talked about both your kind of back office challenges or your kind of digitization challenges, and I think sometimes you can solve a problem from a let's get more revenue and fix the cost problem first, and some people saying let's fix the cost problem first and then we'll chase the revenue later. Do you see people playing kind of one direction or the other?
Yeah, I think you can see some of the behaviours in the market, and you know if you're an investment management firm trying to get into planning, how do you do it? Do you buy a financial planning firm? Do you start to hire people and try and build out a team around them? You know, if you buy an existing firm, you know, what infrastructure have they been running on? What tools and capability they've got? Do you want to integrate those back in with what you've got supporting your existing teams, or do you keep them separate for a while and try and connect them up at the front end? If you're trying to build a team, when do you start to invest in the core infrastructure? Do you do it up front, or do you wait till they kind of got some clients starting to come in and you've got some revenue to kind of support it? And these are conversations we are often having with firms to say, actually, when's the right time? We kind of think we know where we're trying to get to, but when's the right time to start to pull tools together, to start to connect up the operating model, to start to invest in some of the capabilities that are going to enable us to scale this business. Thinking about some of the consolidator plays there are in the market, you know, one of the hazards for them is having made multiple purchases of firms, they end up with almost every bit of technology that there is in the market and every single process multiple times right across their business model. And then, you know, when do they start to tackle the consolidation? Is it, you know, just keep on growing the business, but ultimately there comes a point where somebody says, yeah, we're just throwing lots and lots of people at this. We're not really improving our margins. We're not really scalable, and there's, you know, accidents waiting to happen probably, because every client's getting a slightly different answer and a slightly different experience, and a regulator will pick that apart at some point. So there are, yeah, there's lots of firms out there who are kind of, have made the first steps and are now trying to work through, you know, what's the right time to take a step back and make sure that we've got the right infrastructure around the businesses to be able to support them. And increasingly, you know, firms recognize that taking that on and being measured and planned about how you do it is really important. Otherwise, you end up in a point where you get that spaghetti mess, and somebody's going to have to sort it out.
Yeah, excellent. So look, that's, Ken, as always, kind of really interesting conversation. I think it's quite clear that certainly the future is going to be firms having a broader skill set to be able to take clients and offer them kind of planning and investment management in at various stages in their lives and at different kind of sizes and shapes, but certainly that's going to have to be something on everybody's radar going forward. But it's got that really interesting balance of, it should be it would be a fantastic model if you get it right, but it's certainly got a whole host of challenges along the way. So I think kind of I haven't seen any questions coming in, and again, that might be a complete failure on my behalf on the webinar driving. So if any questions have come in and I haven't seen them, I promise I'll pick them up. But I think probably in summary, Ken, I think from our perspective, from an Iress perspective, we're always delighted to have conversations with people about that think big stage. What would you need to do in order to kind of plan for that kind of 5-year model and that kind of iteration from where you are to a future state? What's the kind of thing that you kind of most engage with and kind of get interested in when people kind of pick up the phone and ask you a question? What kind of questions would you be kind of like to answer?
I think the ones that our phone most often rings with is firms saying, look, we recognize that there's a challenge here, that we've got this silo activity, and we recognize that's not the right answer. Come and help us pick through what are our options. How potentially could we tackle this? Is it a technology problem? Is it a system problem? Is it a incentives and rewards problem? Is it a skills and capability problem? And often it's a mix of all of those things that need to be tackled at the same time. So whether it's firms saying we're just setting out on this journey, or look, we've been doing this for some while and now we know that we've got some issues that we need to tackle, we need to sort for the next stage of growth. It's often about let's be clear about what problem we're trying to tackle here. So it's not just about throwing another technology solution at it, or just getting the right another planning firm or another acquisition under our belt. Actually, it's about taking a step back and working through how the whole business is best going to operate in the future.
Excellent, thanks, Ken. So yeah, anybody who dialed on, feel free to kind of reach out to Ken or I, kind of ask those questions that you may not have asked today, particularly if you've got some kind of challenges within your business that you might want to solve. I thank everybody for your time and attending today. I'll stay on for a couple more minutes if anybody's got any questions, but other than that, thank you everybody for your time, and we'll see you again. Cheers. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks very much, Matt. Great to chat to you again.
You too. Cheers.